Hey Marcel, it's good to see you.
What's up, Eric? I'm good, man. We're recording this on the morning of PvE drop for set 12, so exciting time for TFT, but also excited to be here and chat with you, man.
What's your favorite set 12 unit? First impression.
Favorite set 12 unit? I didn't get to do the playtest, but
Mhm.
I have read fair amounts of the unit traits and whatnot. If I recall, on set 8, there is a laser core trait, which is really similar to Honeymancer, and I really enjoyed playing an opener of Renekton 2. People who have played set 8,
Yeah.
Renekton 2 with the Warmog and the Spark would just streak you straight to level 800 HP. And there was also a meme build, Aircraft Carrier Blitz, where you would
Mhm.
laser course your Blitzcrank, trap him in the back, and he'd become an absolute beast. And now they have Blitz himself as a Honeymancer unit. So I
Yep.
feel like even though if you read his ability, it sounds so boring. It's like he has a shield and that's it. But because of his trait, I think he'll be a really fun unit. So it's Blitz for me.
All right. And
One cost Blitz.
he has a hero augment too, right? Or am I missing?
Oh, I'm not sure. I forget now what all the hero augments are. If so, that'll make it even more exciting. But yeah, I forget now if he has one or not.
All right, cool. So we'll make Blitzcrank the thumbnail.
Awesome. Love it.
You've been on a tear in TFT in set 11. I think it's the first set that you really devoted yourself full time, right? You hit rank 2 NA, you started streaming, and you also wrote a killer Reddit post, which I think up until a couple of days ago was like the most popular Reddit post in the last few months until Dishsoap's announcement or the announcement that Dishsoap won Worlds. So that surpassed your Reddit post.
Rightfully, yeah, I'm super happy for the guy,
Exactly.
and he should get way more. Yeah. But
Yeah. So I'm curious if you had asked yourself before you had, and we'll get to this a little bit later too, before you had actually devoted yourself full time TFT, like if you had zoomed or rewinded and told yourself a few months ago, hey, this would be where you're at today, how surprised would you have been? Like, what would your thoughts have been as far as what you've been able to accomplish in the last?
that's a good question. I'm trying to think towards what expectations I've had and where I thought I would be. I would say it'd be mixed. I would say as far as performance goes, I would think my results are probably around mean for what I would have expected. My sort of, I would say, somewhat stretch goal for devoting myself full time to the game was to try to qualify for regionals. But I think if I was realistic with myself, just looking at my performances in previous sets, and also just like the caliber of players that make it to that level, and how much they had played as well themselves, that is probably more along the lines of 75th, 80th percentile result based on my assumptions. And so I was still very happy with how far I made it in the competitive set. I ended up coming up, I think I want to say 10 or so, 10-ish spots short as far as qualifier points go, mostly due to a bad first tactician trials. If I had performed the way I did in the last two cups in the first one, I would have easily made it actually. But nonetheless, was super happy with how things went out. I think went down, even though you can have all these expectations of yourself, and a lot of these expectations are based on. I had also had like reasonably good ranks in previous sets, and further, I had competed at an esport before, Clash Royale, and had hit rank 1 at that back in the day. It's been many years now. Yeah, despite whatever expectations you might have, you still never know how things are going to go, right? Like TFT is such a difficult game, a game of mistakes, and reaching that as far as performance is still something I'm very proud of, and yeah, no regrets in that regard, despite not hitting like the official goal. And then I would say more surprised though on the reception to, I guess, like the appetite of the overall community for the kind of content I tend to move towards. For example, with the Reddit post and with the stream that it's been a couple of weeks now of doing it. And the reception has been really surprising in that I'd always viewed the TFT sort of content community as being much more about like memes and screaming and
Soju,
yeah,
Setsukan.
that style. And I find it entertaining, to be honest, myself. But I just know that it really never been my style. I'm much more like, I created content back in the day for Clash Royale, and a lot of my style is just way more like trying to be analytical, trying to be logical and think through various strategies and present that. And I had no idea how that would be received in TFT community. Like it worked well with Clash, at least in my opinion, in a large way. The community is international. And so it's hard to very international. And so it is hard to have a very consistent, more personality that appeals very broadly in an entertainment sort of way.
Mhm.
Right? Like you imagine if viewers are from everywhere, like how do you have, if your viewers are all from NA, for example, then like a very American style of humor is going to always succeed, right? Whereas in Clash, there was no like dominant nationality, not as much as TFT. And that's why I think strategy was a much strategic content was very, you could expect it to do well, right? But no, thankfully, like it seems like people are down for that in TFT.
How would you describe the way that people have received your content and interacted with you? Like how is that different aside from just engagement and number of people that are saying or watching you, for example,
Mhm.
or upvoting your posts? Like maybe more specifically as far as the qualitative aspect about the reception and the specific feedback that you've had around what people like about your approach and your style. Like what has stood out in that regard?
No, I love the way you're wording these questions. I feel like, yeah, I think on the one hand, I have to first preface by saying we all should realize that a lot of the feedback you'll get as a creator will always be super biased, right? I'm obviously getting a lot of this feedback from viewers on my chat who are there a lot, people who want to have, especially on stream, I feel like as streamers are newer, they want to hear the streamer say their name. They'll always be overly positive. So the first caveat with that there'll always be some underlying level of bias that makes, unless your style is like very, I guess, polarizing, you'll usually tend to get more positive feedback. Nonetheless,
Mhm.
though, I would say what has the quality, like what the qualitative sort of side of how feedback and reception for my like content has been, it's been so positive, almost like too positive in a way that's been so refreshing for me. I really enjoyed that aspect back in the day with my YouTube channel. I experienced a bit of a surprise, like arrival on scene content creation in Clash Royale as well, actually back in the day. And it almost feels like I've been able to relive that that sort of moment in my life, which has been so cool. With Clash back in the day, my first video, I had no idea what to expect, created zero content. I had just hit rank 2 at the end of a competitive set. So like at the time where everyone's trying the hardest. And
So
I
just
created my
playing
first
TFT right
video.
now. This is like a repeat. Rank one next.
Yeah, hopefully, I mean, we'll see. Actually, I used to now think about it. My first YouTube video mimicked almost the same title as my first like, well, maybe not first Reddit post, but like the Reddit post that actually helped a lot with my visibility.
Uh-huh.
Both of them are about hitting rank 2. Funny enough. And back then people were so positive. Oh, with YouTube back in the days, even beyond like strategic content, people are like saying things such to the effect of, "Oh, playing Clash Royale, trying to improve a Clash Royale, changed my outlook on life." It was like very overly positive in that way, and it was like I didn't fully understand it, but at the same time, it was like, wow, if I feel like I'm having such a nice positive effect on people, how can I ever want to stop doing getting all this positive feedback? It makes me feel so good, and to know that people appreciate your style, which I would say with TFT is even more genuine to how I actually am. I think when I was first creating YouTube content, I was much more still trying to mimic other people's styles and be more like presentational. With streaming on TFT, especially, I just try to be myself and to have people be very receptive to that. It's just like a level of acceptance that, yeah, it feels awesome. Like to fully nerd out and people appreciate that. I guess
I
it
want I
reflects.
want to double click on the point that you made around how people said that it changed their outlook on life. Because I feel like what resonated with me, and I suspect what resonated with a lot of people on Reddit posts, is that you're not just talking about TFT, like specifically, like you're talking about a mindset and a psychology and an approach to the game, which can be abstracted like more generally to life as well, around not just like how you get better at TFT, but how do you get better in general, anything. And then also like, how do you motivate yourself and how do you energize yourself? And what's the right way to approach the game to both have fun at it and then also to like perform. Uh, and I resonate with that. And I suspect that might be like what resonated as far as you reached out to me. So, hey, we seem to have some commonalities here. And so I definitely resonate with that. But can you talk a little bit more about that aspect?
Yeah, I would say people clinging on to that, or you mentioning that as well, and just hearing people mention that aspect as being something that they appreciated, actually is probably even more meaningful to me than to hear more so like the TFD feedback directly like about the game or is useful. I think uh, I've gotten into many various skills, sports, games, careers over I'm over 30 now. I'm not that old, but at the same time in gaming culture, maybe I'm ancient. But yeah, it's always been an underlying like approach of mine to really be much more like growth mindset is one way to put it. And it's funny, I've chatted with many friends about this, whether it's my approach to the people who I also respect their approach to trying to get better at skills and whatnot. And doing that, you also try to psychoanalyze why did I end up having that sort of approach? And I think interestingly enough, I feel like in a lot of ways, it can stem from some level of discontent with your current like performance or level of where you're at currently. If you're fully like content with where you're at, there really is no motivation to try to improve. Not to say that's not to say either side is better or worse, but I think in my case, a lot of it, as a psychoanalyst myself, just comes from being a younger sibling and wanting to live up to your parents' expectations and outperform an older sibling kind of thing. So I've always been
How much
competitive
older is your older
that
sibling?
way. 2 years older. And so
And
it's
brother?
like a threshold where he'll always be better than you when you're younger, but you can pretend like you have some chance.
Yep.
Yeah, and so we play like chess together, he'd dominate me. Play any video games together, he would dominate me. And then I'd always try to spend in extra time when we would stop playing against each other, practicing to try to compete and get better. And whether it's for his approval, my parents' approval, or just to feel better.
Yeah.
But that's how it manifested growing up. And then eventually I started playing golf and got instruction at a pretty young age as well. My dad is always very much into coaching, being an athlete himself. He played basketball growing up. And so I think that much more analytical mindset was instilled in me a lot at a fairly young age. And so then I would say that sort of helped hone that aspect of my approach to things. And then zooming a lot forward now, I would say I'd always just had my own ideas of how improvement and like trying to analyze your approach and get better at that for myself. I'd always had ideas of how I thought how that approach would work best for me. But then it's very enlightening when a friend of mine who I really his approach recommended a book for me that he said, "Oh, it seems like your approach and your overall mindset, this book would really resonate with you." It is a book by a Swedish psychologist, PhD, Eric and Anders Ericsson.
Anderson.
Yeah.
Eric Anderson.
And Anders Ericsson.
Anders Ericsson. Okay.
Yeah, he's actually a researcher. He's up as like the expert of experts. He's a researcher that was 10,000-hour rule came out of his research, even though it is misrepresented. And like the 10,000-hour rule, if people are not familiar with, is this rule that, or this idea that if you spend 10,000, you need to spend 10,000 hours doing something to become an expert at it. And in fact, his research, and in this Peak book, he discusses how this is misrepresented. A lot more of it is about what he dubs as deliberate practice, is what he uses most important, which is basically an approach where you are much more critical about your performance and much more feedback driven, weakness driven, as opposed to just raw 10,000 hours of doing something. But in reading through this book, it really helped hone my ideas on this and helps me try to explain things better when trying to write something like a Reddit post, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow, a lot of that resonates with me personally. So I'm a dad of 2, and my son is 7, and I actually coach his basketball team. I played like junior high and high school basketball. And so I feel like there's definitely a lot of elements, like how to get better, like sports psychology and game psychology, I feel like are really similar in that regard. And then the thing on sibling rivalry, like I have a younger brother, he's 1 year younger, and we always competed like in basketball and games as well. So I definitely feel where you're coming from there. And there's another psychologist, Alfred Adler, who actually wrote on sibling order, like that where you are in your order of siblings affects like kind of your psychology and your kind of personality. And also both in relation to age differential and how your parent, like trying to get parental approval and to be able to stand out.
I'm
So
going to
that's
ask you
like
pointers to that when you say it's research that this person has published about.
The Courage to be Disliked. That's the book that it's actually written by a Japanese author who takes a lot of Adler's ideas and then repackages it in a more simpler way to be able to understand. I actually first heard of that book from Mark Andreessen. That was like one of his favorite books of all time. So that's heavily influenced me. And then I used to also make games, but after that, I switched from being like a startup founder to coaching startup founders. A lot of the stuff that you're talking about, I definitely resonate. So I wanted to then transition this into like, so when we first talked, I asked you whether your username was associated with Marcel Proust at all. And you had mentioned that it wasn't. But I don't know how familiar you are with Proust, but for those that aren't, he was a French author in the early 1900s who wrote a book called In Search of Lost Time. And that was like widely considered one of the most influential pop fiction novels in the 20th century. And he was like a philosopher and actually has a lot of really similar ideas to you. So I wonder if you're like an incarnation of him. I went through your Reddit post, and then I went through, like, I love reading and I've done a lot of reading, and I actually have my own digital notebook, and I went through my notes on my favorite Proust quotes, and I actually came up with some that actually relates to your Reddit ideas. So I want to go through some of your quotes and then match them with Proust quotes, and then I
I
want to
love
hear
it.
your thoughts on it. So
Yeah,
we're gonna talk about Marcel P and Marcel Proust.
that is so fun. It makes me think of in the TFT world, there was like Mort or Milk. If you remember seeing this quote, it was quote stated by Mort or Milk. Now we have Marcel P or Marcel Proust.
All right, so you ready for number one? I have three of these.
All right.
So from your Reddit post, you said common pitfall of TFT players is thinking in always and never.
Mhm.
And Marcel Proust said, facts do not find their way into the world in which our beliefs reside. So I'll say that one more time. You said thinking in always and never. And
Mhm.
Marcel Proust said, facts do not find their way into the world in which our beliefs reside. So can you elaborate on that and maybe say how that applies to TFT players and how these ideas can make us better TFT players?
Facts do not find their way into which the beliefs
Into the world in which our beliefs reside. And I think this might also connect with your point around how a lot of TFT players don't look at stats enough either. And then maybe even the point that you made around, I think, when you're watching streamers, being critic as opposed to being a sponge.
Yeah, actually, I really like that. Maybe I need to read this guy's writing for him. I'm really not familiar with Marcel Proust writing. I'm usually not like a big fan of fiction writing, but that line, I have to ask you what that was from as well. To me, it speaks towards the difference between what our mental models may be of something. When he mentions like our beliefs and the difference between that and fact. When I think of trying to improve at something, or just my approach in general always tends to assume that one's mental model comes from a place of imperfection. I think maybe at the end of the day, if you really honed your craft a lot, that might be not the best assumption. Maybe it's better to assume you only have minor flaws in your approach and you're really trying to fine tune things. But overall, and I think this is also reflected in the Anders Ericsson book. Basically, the goal is to really just refine your mental model. And when he talks about facts, for example, this is where the perfect sort of gameplay, perfect approach lies. And the goal is to try to uncover what is the difference between these two, right? A lot of the things I was mentioning in my post are skirting around that, right? Thinking in always and never, these are basically these are basically mental models that are flawed in some way, but to their credit, also have benefits, right? As a newer player, having a really complex mental model that branches in so many different ways. If I see this augment, see have this item combo, I don't make it. It's way too hard to play like that. And so, of course, when you start out, you want to have a very simple model, right? And this is the same, for example, in not to change subjects too much, would be a very brief mention of AI. A statistical model, when you have very little data, is always going to be very simple. If you try to use a very complex model when you have little data, you will likely overfit a lot. There's basically too much complexity for what the model can handle. It's only as you have more and more data that you want to use a more complex model to capture the nuances and the actual underlying problem. And ultimately, you assume that where the facts are is a complex model, but it's just a matter of working up them to get there. And so that's in TFT, for example, that manifests in understanding stats, which are usually going to be closer to the truth than your beliefs. You know, it's not always the case because, again, stats are also imperfect in terms of sample size, in terms of bias, and how players create the data, in terms of how you might interpret the data incorrectly. But other things as well, like trying to analyze and think through more nuances through your thought process. Because even without using like direct facts, you can always try to uncover differences between what the underlying real or correct things are, for example, by analyzing top streamers and seeing what their differences are between your play and their play. But yeah, I love that comparison you brought up. I'm curious to see what the other two ones are now too. But you remember what was the context with that line?
don't remember the exact context. When I take notes, I highlight snippets in my Kindle and then I'll just like extract, but I lose some of the context as a result. So
That's
that's not
fine.
like
We
I'm
can, we have homework for,
But I love the point that you made around like you're describing both confirmation bias from a psychological standpoint and then like AI models perspective is the amount of data that any individual player can collect is so small, given the number of permutations that you could play with this game. That's also why watching streams from a learning standpoint is so valuable because you can get so much more information than just your own individual play.
Mhm.
But then on top of that, like what you call a fact can be misinterpreted. And Asa talks about this a lot by just the sample size of data. Like what might just be variance as opposed to a large sample size. And then on top of that, the number of the facts are constantly changing in TFT like every patch. Like, so
Right.
what you considered like a belief or what you quote know from one patch, like the next patch could be completely wrong. And so that's so much, I feel as a TFT player, and both what I love about TFT and what can be extremely frustrating is you constantly have to redefine yourself. You have to constantly like let go of what you think so that you can learn something new. And that process is extremely mentally taxing to be able to be like, have the humbleness to like, be like, I don't know anymore. And then on top of that, when you go into competitive setting, to have both the humbleness to say, I don't know, but also the confidence to believe that you can actually perform well. And what also stands out to me, there was, I don't know if you saw this one, the Reddit post, someone clipped Dishsoap's like winning moment where he was like, he was overly like over the moon, like emotional, saying, I believed. Like there has to be this sense of belief that you can have confidence, that you are strong enough, that you've prepared well enough. And yet you also need this paradoxical approach to the game where you have to simultaneously believe, and yet you have to also not believe so much that you can't let new information.
100%. You have to go through these like ebbs and flows, right? Of going in improving node. But as soon as the competition's there, you got to be super confident in your approach. Otherwise, I think it's very common in TFT, as you're mentioning, even across super top players. And I think it's refreshing to see that they will acknowledge that on both sides, right? They'll be informed, then 2 weeks later, they're not. And I fully resonate with what you're saying. That's a big part of why I enjoy TFT. Another part of why also it could be very tiring to continue to try to improve at it, but it keeps you humble for sure. Definitely, like you can feel like you're completely on top of a patch, even in the same patch. Honestly, you can feel like you're completely on top of things, and then somehow like some new meta or something leak, and then all of a sudden your approach no longer works. Or for example, there have been times where top players will have a certain play style and then they won't stream and they'll climb a lot with that approach. Maybe it's like usually one comp, and then they stream it. All of a sudden, everyone plays it, and you can't use it anymore because it's three-way contested. And I'm curious to see how if I could have some level of success streaming in set 12, how that will go for me as well. If I find some hidden tech, am I going to be tempted to try and hide it because I don't want to leak it too much? But then I really enjoy streaming, so how is that going to go? But yeah, TFT is so cool.
All right, let's go to quote number 2.
All right.
So Marcel P said, play more open-minded and freely to test different play styles. And Marcel Proust said, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. I'll say that one more time. Real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. What does that mean to you, and how does that idea connect with your idea of playing more open-minded and freely and testing new playstyle?
To me, it sounds like he also was a gamer and also advocates for making Smurf accounts. I think that's what it is. That line that I was mentioning, I'm using one example is create Smurf account to try to play more open and fearlessly with different play styles. And I think there were a couple mentions in the post about how they didn't like this suggestion because of some negative connotations to smurfing, which I can understand with other games. Hopefully in TFT, smurfing not as painful of an experience for other players, but nonetheless, I still feel like the point stands and that you want to have some way of experimenting with different styles without holding back too much, without being afraid of your LP and whatnot. New eyes versus new landscape. I like that as well. This guy's deep. I like the other Marcel P. Yeah, all right, I'll accept it. I am the reincarnation of Marcel Proust. Even though I'm not Filipino and not French. Yeah, no, that's me. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this idea of new landscapes, like you could apply it to a new landscape, could be a new patch, it could be a new set. It could be when people are like, oh, like I hate set 10 or I hate set 11. And there's this idea that the problem is what's out there, the game, or maybe if you extend this more generally to life, the problem is my coworkers, or my job, or like my significant other, like my girlfriend, my boyfriend, my husband, my wife. External to me, as opposed to this idea of, hey, maybe it's my perception of it, not seeing what might actually be there if I shift my perspective.
Yeah, it definitely sounds a lot to that. Whether the new landscapes, new eyes, it's a matter of how you perceive things. Exactly. And landscapes, the external aspect of that can be viewed in many different ways as well, right? It can be with regard to what are you striving towards? Or do you have external motivations, or is it more how you are going to end up viewing things, or what does your underlying approach end up looking like afterwards, regardless of what your goals were? Is it how other people view things, or where the external sort of conflicts could arise? Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that, but it's both fairly like straightforward to analyze. But as you think about it deeper, there's so many ways you can apply it, right?
Yeah. That also reminds me of like how I feel like every set, there's usually people converge towards, oh, this unit is good, or this comp. And then there's sometimes like the naysayers, or like the people that are actually innovating on the fringes that are like, no, like that's not true. And even what you were talking about, right? Like hidden tech. Basically, the hidden tech is a set of new eyes that have experimented on this like different thing that's seeing the same landscape in a different way. And and what's also interesting about TFT is because we have like gaming has evolved so much since, let's say, 20 years ago. Like I was playing one of the first RTS games, like Command and Conquer and like Dune 2000 back in the day. This was like Westwood, like the game studio before Blizzard. Like they were creating like the first strategy game. And there was no form of communication between players other than like basic chat in the game. There wasn't like social media, YouTube, like Twitch. But now all you need is one set fresh eyes to see this problem. And then the moment you share that spreads like wildfire. Say,
Yeah, it's so wild, as you stated, how different sort of gaming is trying to improve at gaming, and probably even you can extend it even beyond gaming. Improving at various skills is from N years ago to now. I played Command and Conquer Red Alert, but I think it's Command and Conquer 2 was the first sort of RTS game that I got into. Just funny you mentioned that. I really enjoyed that game growing up as well. But yeah, so I think back to like how I would try to improve at games before. For example, like Super Smash Bros. On 64, playing with neighbors, friends at home. Try and do what you can to analyze your mistakes and get better. But like nowadays, you just watch someone that's better, and it's just wild how much stronger of a signal you can get by doing that. I also think I've read some chess books, and some of the grandmasters mentioning just how back in the day to get better, they would like do like a 45-minute hike. I think this is Vladimir Kramnik, Russian GM, who would have to like do a super long hike to like some library to check out one book and then bring it back. And then when he was younger, his dad had to do it for him because he couldn't make the hike out to get to this library, and then just spend hours looking at this one book. And now, even with chess, you can literally go on stream, on Twitch, right? And find the best players like discussing their thought process, which is just wild.
yep. All right. Quote number 3. So you said, Marcel P said, use error patterns and habits in your gameplay to guide what you should work on. And Marcel Proust said, happiness is beneficial for the body, but it is grief that develops the powers of the mind.
Oh.
Happiness is beneficial for the body, but it is grief that develops powers of the mind. How does that connect back to your idea of using errors and patterns and habits in your gameplay to guide what you should work on?
Wow, I've never heard it described in that way. It almost sounds dark and describing, analyzing your errors as grief, but I get it for sure. If you think to when you get out of a game, for example, is it your first or your eighth that you're really able to glean from the most, right? Which is where grief and joy can definitely tell if you think of it in that way. You have to be very focused on if you're in improvement mode, then assuming you're able to get beyond the negative emotions of said, if you want to call it failures, mistakes, or what have you, you do have to hone in on your errors, right? And it can, if you do it again and again, and if you're way too focused on only looking at your errors, how do you even develop confidence in that way? Which is why you end up thinking of it almost, you can think of it in terms of happiness and grief. Which is why I think it's still important to recognize the first aspect of that quote. I think he's mentioning happiness is how you focus it on your or focus or develop joy or some level of satisfaction in your heart. One needs a bit of both. I think a lot of my friends actually have rock climb a lot and do a lot of other activities where you have goals that you try to work towards. Rock climbing is very discreet in that you either climb something or not. And a lot of my friends that I share a lot of these hobbies with actually make fun of me in that I am very demonstratively like and outwardly celebratory when I achieved some goal that I had set. And I think of that as if you're going to be very critical with yourself when analyzing your mistakes, I think it's only fair to yourself to also celebrate your victories, right? But you shouldn't just, unless you're so mentally strong that you're okay with only being critical of yourself all the time. I feel like it sounds so rough if you're only like the critical coach yourself and not your own best friend as well in that way. What was the quote again that I brought up? And it was looking at your mental models, right? And speaking of
Error
errors,
patterns,
error
habits
pattern.
in your gameplay to guide what you should work.
I think in that line, I'm trying to be more specific about what, not just, oh, look through your mistakes, but more so trying to understand, oh, a lot of how you improve in TFT is understanding, like, I'm trying to think of a different word for patterns or habits. Basically, looking over a large sample size of your performance and trying to see what are the commonalities between your errors. You try to cluster those, and that'll help you identify what is it exactly that I don't get. Because it's easy on the one hand to just look through a game or two or three even and be like, oh yeah, I tend to not play faded line. Okay, sure. And so then your takeaway may be that I need to look for RE Kindred more in my shops or click on them more and hold these pairs, and maybe I can play towards faded even though it's not that good in the patch. But maybe actually if you find that over 3 sets, for example, this is like extending the idea of like an error pattern or habit. Over 3 sets, you tend to underplay a B tier comp. Maybe that means you're actually leaving placements on the table across all your TFT gameplay only because you're forcing yourself to play A or S tier comps when in fact, this very Worlds and regionals, we saw a lot of top players still playing faded, very much a B tier line and doing very well. Greya was an example. I think he even had it as his main. I would assume his game plan because in Worlds he played it a lot. I think he got unlucky quite a few games, but he has pretty good scores that have faded, surprisingly. And yeah, it's just one example of how your error patterns or habits may manifest. And yeah, if you try to improve on that, then maybe you won't suffer as much grief. But I guess grief is needed if you want to improve. Pros and cons.
As a follow-up to that, what's the most grief you've experienced in a TFT game or in a session? Like, what's the most tilted you've ever got? And how did you go about learning from that experience? But also, I think it's very common, and I've seen like a lot of examples on Twitter with TFT players who maybe go through a downswing. And this can happen a lot, especially if TFT is like your full-time thing. Maybe you don't have a lot of IRL friends and you're not going out and touching the grass. Like you just fully zoomed in on the screen, and it could be easy to get lost, especially if things just aren't going your way and you're stuck in a rut. What's the most grief that you've experienced, and how do you psychologically anchor yourself to be able to pull yourself out of the grief, whatever grief that might be that you're experiencing?
Yeah, good question. Honestly, if I think the TFT, I don't even know if any specific moment stands out. And don't get me wrong, I'm definitely someone that can get very emotional, very down on whether it's my own play or get very not even down, but like tilted or upset based on whether external factors, like I'm unlucky, or with myself if I played poorly. I definitely have many moments. Funny, as you mentioned, touch grass. I used to compete at golf growing up, and I can think of so many moments that I even broke a golf club over my neck in a tournament. I was 16. I had a ball in the water. Okay, it was not intentional to be fair, but I was holding the club over my neck, just like in anguish, just, oh, how could I make such an error? And then it just snapped over my neck. It like had caused like a very minor cut on the back of my head. And there was actually some amount of blood. And a rules official came up to me and was like, that is like very much not allowed. I was like, my bad, dude. It was not intentional, I swear. But, and even like more serious levels, like where I would, like the most painful is typically when you or at the very end of a tournament, to some level like choking or having a really bad performance at the very end. Many accounts of that. And so I think having those moments across various endeavors growing up, most especially trying to compete and eventually make pro golf, which I didn't end up further pursuing, but that was a goal growing up. Having experienced so many levels of highs and very much lows as well, helped ground my, I guess, reaction to poor performances and getting unlucky in TFT. That's not to say that I'm achieved perfect zen by any means. You will definitely find me getting upset on stream. I can be very emotional and attached to my performance in TFT, but at the very least, it helps me ground it at some level. I'd like to think, and as we all do, that we're improving and transcending our former selves, and I'm getting better and better at dealing with that level. But yeah, I don't think anything really stands out specifically in TFT, but yes.
How about more generally, whether that clashed or golf, and we can kind of transition into your kind of competitive history on that regard. What have you learned from playing golf competitively, especially since you were attempting to go pro? Like, what were the experiences, the skills, whether it's the mental frameworks, the approach to the game, like how to balance like your non-competitive life and your competitive life? What have you learned from golf, clash, and now that can now be applied to TFT that might be helpful for other people as lessons that you
Oh,
learned?
oh man, there's so much. I'm trying to think of what I would like to mention as the main thing. Good question again.
Well, the top two or three.
Yeah, if I'm thinking towards previous endeavors and how they help toward TFT, let's see, top 2 or 3. Okay, let me begin with, and this is something that was better formulated as a really good professor in college who did this thing that he called thoughts for the weekend. It sounds super lame, but he would mention like a few anecdotes that he thought helped him as he was learning in life. His professor's name is John Ousterhout. And if anyone is one to look these things up, but this one I felt very much when competing against golfers, junior golfers. I felt more so in golf than in gaming, to be fair. But this one is where you feel like there are a lot of players that are at a much better spot than you are in terms of whether it's their skill level or they're just better than you in some way. And this John Osterhout's thought for the weekend was, it's not a, it's something effective. Your slope is more important than your y-intercept. Like very
Mm,
nerdy way of just saying it's about how well you improve, not about where you currently are at.
yeah.
And it's very simple yet pretty deep. And with golf, I started at age 9, and it's funny because I mean, it's a pretty young age. But as I was improving and trying to get better and just getting older, I found that so much of my competition was and people who were better than me were players who started much younger. People who started at 3 or 4, and they just came across as I watched like TFT, for example, and you see someone like Setsuko roll down. Like, how am I ever going to be able to match that level of APM? And the thing is, it's not a matter of thinking that the gap is so large. You just have to look at where they're at, where you are, what are the differences, and make that up by your slope, right? Like, how well can you improve? And over time, that really is what's going to matter more, right? Unless, of course, you're trying to like it's a very time constrained thing, then yeah, then sure, then why that matters more. But usually most things in life, maybe I don't want to say most, but like in a lot of ways, you have the benefit of having time to improve at some, or you can at least try to afford yourself that. And it felt that way, especially with gaming. Very common that people pick up games pretty late into their lifespan. And so maybe you're new to TFT and it seems like so many players are so far ahead of you, or that your friends, competitive players, and understanding that a lot of it is really just how you improve. And if you improve faster than someone else, given enough time, you will always become better than them, right? No matter what. It's just a matter of how much time. And that is more so a matter, again, of how steep is your slope of improvement.
That reminds me of a physics analogy quote that was like, your speed is more important than your position. And then even more than that, your velocity is more important than speed. So you could be going really fast, but going in the wrong direction, like that, it doesn't even matter. And I feel like that really applies to TFT too, because with the degree of content change, both in the form of patches and across sets, it's really easy actually if you learn the fundamentals of the game, the mental model and the perception of how to approach the game at a really abstract level, for you to beat somebody that's been playing the game for a while. If they're not really someone one tricked a reroll comp to get to challenger, like that's not going to be scalable for them to be able to keep competing. That, okay, you're going fast in this one direction right now, but that's not a velocity that's going to sustain you.
100%.
And so for someone that's really devoted to, who might be completely new to TFT, devoted to like really learning the game at a core level and understanding the basics, fundamental, and keep getting better at that every day, you can make Challenger easily, like no time.
Definitely. It's definitely easier said than done because I feel like resources on fundamentals, it's just hard because they're not always going to be grounded in the current set. But I 100% agree that trying to get better at that, honestly, definitely as a beginner, but even as higher levels of play is so important. Again, it cannot be understated.
Yep. And that's what's cool too about, I feel like each patch and especially each new set with new mechanics, I feel like they unravel different ways to look at the game that
Yeah.
uncover like a different way that you think about fundamental. For example, for me, encounters, and then especially just my brief glimpse at Charm right now, it's like learning to exchange, having an exchange rate almost between gold and HP, or gold and item, or gold and whatever. And that's what Charms is. In a specific spot, how do you value any dimension of the game or any variable of the game that you can move around? And that's really helped me. And that I actually feel like this last set with encounters has one fundamental aspect of my game that has improved is I've thought a lot more proactively about when to level, exchange gold for HP in the form of like just leveling and putting in a strong unit. And that doesn't have anything to do with encounters, but it's just because encounters taught me like to the counter of, oh, do you want, I forget what the exchange rate, do you want this much gold or do you want HP? I think there was one that, and that decision alone shifted my perception of that same decision is applied to fit 3-5. I could give up, I could be at 50 gold or I could be at 30 gold, but I could preserve some HP as a result. And furthermore, like it's not just I'm at 50 to 30, like that could actually swing the fight. So it's not only I'm swinging, or it's not only that I'm preserving HP, it's also like game 1 gold. So it might be only a 1 gold loss in exchange for
And you're potentially damaging the other player's health bar as well. Maybe there's so much that could be affected by it for sure.
Yeah. And you could see players like Dishsoap or Setsugo make that decision, but I wouldn't have ever consciously thought about that until Encounter came in and was like, oh, gold versus HP. Oh, of course.
Yeah, I think we all have our gripes with encounters, but I agree and double down on like just having more decisions thrown in your face. One, helps you improve in many other aspects as well. As you, if you analyze like why you're making X decisions and try to apply it to other points in the game as well. But two, just makes it more skill expressive. I feel like I just think to the game prior to encounters, prior to augments. I feel like prior to like anvils being given to you, weren't there like on the order of, I want to guess like 5 to 10x fewer decisions per game that you had to make. And now all these decisions you're having to make on carousel, the completed items, there's so much more going on. Maybe it makes it harder for a newer player, but I feel like, at least from the lens of a player who's been playing for a while, I started set 3.5. It is more skill expressive in that way, for sure. And that's what makes it more enjoyable as the devs continue to improve it in that way.
And Charms is just going to continue to increase the complexity.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's easy to sort of envision what the negative aspects of it could be, but I fully agree that it basically is forcing you to, again, make decisions every 2 shops, which just goes to my point of it will always be a good thing in terms of skill expression and helping you get better at that decision-making process, which can help you in many other aspects.
So I wanted to loop back to the point that you were making around, I have the mental model in my head of the speed versus the acquisition, but the analogy you had used was, remind me again?
Y-intercept versus slope.
Y-intercept versus slope. Focusing on the slope allows you to maintain a certain level of confidence to believe that you can surpass someone that may be perceived as further ahead of you at the moment. What was your thought process as far as what caused you to give up on the dream of making golf professional? Or you hit for Clash, like I'm bucketing this under like just the general category of competition. For Clash, you did hit rank 1. What motivated you to leave Clash and then pick up TFT? And then even thinking about how to apply that today to where you are, you hit rank 2, you have goals to play at regionals, hit rank 1. How do you balance having a certain level of belief, going back to the grief, the belief, the confidence? How do you connect all of those ideas together to decide, hey, I still believe I can get there with this level of slope versus maybe they are too far away. Maybe this isn't the thing for me. how did you make that decision for golf and Clash? And then how do you apply that to where you are with TFT today?
Man, I've been asked this quality, this amount, this number of questions in this subsequent like fashion order. I'm liking it. Let me do that. I'm looking through the quote that, so I don't misstate it, that John Alstrout had made, and the way he says it verbatim is, a little bit of slope makes up for a lot of y-intercept, which I guess even more like clear, more straightforward in that, specifically addressing like someone can be ahead of you, but as long as your slope is a little bit better than theirs, then you can make up for that.
Flat slope, then all you need is time.
Yeah, exactly. So how did I go about, in my case specifically with golf, I'll start with that first. So I played from ages 9 to 19. I played competitively in the Philippines, moved to the US, and competed in the junior golf scene here. I'm in California now, so I can say here in the US, and then played in college as well, D1 college. And I now can look to several names on any PGA leaderboard and be like, yeah, I played with these guys. And in some ways even be like, damn, if only I continued, maybe I would have, especially when I see a name that I used to be able to beat, it'll be like, what, this guy's worth what amount of money now? And I'm here like TFT or coding or whatever, what have you. But with golf specifically, it really came down to understanding that I actually didn't get into golf for necessarily the most like intrinsic, maybe it's the right word to put, reason. A lot of it is really that my dad really wanted to get me and my brother into sports. And that was one of the obvious now where my true interest lies. I state this. My dad had to haggle with both of us that in order to earn an hour of playing video games, we had to play an hour of sports. Interesting that I have gravitating back towards my real initial interest, right? I found growing up that what I enjoyed most about golf was competing and winning. Competing, winning, and improving. It was not practicing. It was not playing sport itself. It wasn't like being out in nature. I like those things. I like competing. I like winning. And the rest of it was just meh for me. And it really was so clear in my mind that was the case, that I lacked the overall interest in the activity when I went to college. A couple of the players that I was on the same team with in college, one of them has now very consistently been around top 30 in the world. He hasn't really exploded onto this team. His name's Patrick Rogers, but if not mistaken, his last net worth, when I looked at it, or like at least career earnings, was well over 10 mil, 15 mil. So the guy's extremely successful. And seeing like their routine in college, when no one is forcing you to do anything. I didn't have my dad force me to practice. He doesn't have a coach or dad. Everyone's just there on their own accord. And yeah, you schedule with classes, social life, what have you. It just did not compare. The guy's level of interest into the activity and versus me, where I was just more so about competing. And it just came down to making the hard decision. When you see that, are you really able to, number one, compete? And number two, I still had some level of belief that I could make it onto the PGA Tour, but it was more so a question for myself of, even if I did make it there, would I really enjoy my day? Yeah, maybe I would love the few events per year that I would do well in, but golf is a sport of much more so a failure than success. Like the highest win rates in a sport like golf for super dominant players are in the order of 20%. Like Tiger Woods, Jack Nicklaus, these guys were winning at what is considered a ridiculous clip of 20%, 1 in the 5 tournaments. Nothing of that compared to like, let's do it in TFT, right? But I think in TFT, you can spin it where you can the top 4 is a success. I actually never thought about it in the same way, actually, golf and TFT in that way, where you don't really win that often, but like tennis or basketball, the top players are winning like all the time. And so it's like, am I really going to enjoy that? And that's what led me to drop out of golf. It was a very difficult decision at the time. It sounds obvious in my mind now as I state my reasons of getting into the sport and what the differences was between me and the top players. But that's what got me to stop playing golf. So I think if we're just talking about, as you're mentioning, other people are trying to think about this as well, just making sure you're in the activity you're doing for the right reasons, right? Much easier said than done. But if you have some way of analyzing why you're doing something, why you feel exhausted or demotivated, I definitely find, for example, that the other activities that I've been doing a lot more since then, coding professionally for myself, to getting into computer science, and also other hobbies such as gaming, the level of motivation, if I look at it, it's just night and day. How I would feel practicing N hours of golf versus coding for N hours versus gaming. Like the golf is so much, my threshold for getting bored or demotivated was so much lower for golf. It's a couple hours, I was already tired versus the other activities. And so just understanding, if you try enough activities, usually it'll be the case that you'll find some you can tolerate much more than others. And maybe that's where your true interests lie. And you can squeeze more out of your performance in those activities, or just because why not try to push towards activities you more intrinsically enjoy? Right.
Yeah. And part of the point you're making is that I would assume Patrick had a high slope because he was intrinsically motivated. Like he didn't have to, it didn't feel like work to him to go out and do the practice and the deliberate practice specifically. And it felt like extremely hard work to you because it just wasn't energizing. Whereas for TFT, like what might seem like work to someone else just seems like fun to you.
And it's interesting to mention, like, oh, maybe he was, it's hard to know, is it that he really enjoyed it, or maybe he had good slope and he enjoyed it because he had the good, so like, I think Mark Cuban's stating, don't pursue your passions, pursue what you're good at. And sometimes that can be what makes you passionate about something, right? If you find that you're good at it, you will enjoy it more. Like you feel like you only have to put in 1 hour to get the output of someone else that has to put in 5, and you enjoy that aspect. Whatever it is that gets you to enjoy something, you can cling on to that, right? And sometimes it can be the fact that you just overperform at some activity.
So how do you apply that to TFT? What are the aspects of TFT that you find you really enjoy that help you increase the slope? Whereas what are the things might help you increase the slope that you just like, I can't?
I don't know if I've gone as far as to like deeply analyze that, and it makes me want to do it now more, because I've always thought of enjoyment as more in a broader sense, a level of activities. I feel like when I commit myself to trying to improve or play TFT, I try to just view all activities as equal. Everything is fair game, and you try to improve at whatever you feel like you're good or bad at. But I think there's a lot of value to what you're saying, where if you can really understand on a deeper level, okay, these are the aspects that I truly enjoy and can spend 10 hours and not feel like I've burned any time, versus things that are more mundane, boring, or just hard for you to do. Surely that can help you guide your improvement process better. It makes me want to like more deeply analyze what is it that I like, or it's like less about improving at TFT. If I were to think of it like on a surface level, just off the top of my head, I think I enjoy watching top players and trying to differentiate what they do versus what I do. And I probably get less satisfaction out of very deeply analyzing edge cases on stats, which actually is something that Dishsoap does a lot. If people are familiar with Dishsoap, and if you listen to the podcast he has with Rodan, he knows a lot about so many kind of obscure edge cases and stats, which is really important. There are going to be so many times that you have 20 seconds, 10 seconds to make a decision. A very good example of this is Radiant Item Carousel. Radiant Item Carousel or Artifact. Radiant Item Artifact, Radiant Item Carousels are even more. Like you have to make a really fast decision on one component, a unit, and the Radiant Item. And if you don't know the stats off the top of your head, you're not going to make the best decision. And each decision on that kind of carousel can be on the order of 0.5 to 1 full placement, maybe even 1.5 placement if you make a mistake. And so there is value in actually having like a photographic memory of the best stat of a given unit, of a given line per patch, because you might have it and then they change it the next patch, which is why I think I don't enjoy it as much, as it's knowledge that just expires and is literally just rote memorization, right, of the stats. But at the same time, you have to understand it's so important. So you have to do that if you're preparing for World. Right? Maybe you don't care to do that for any random ladder patch, but if you're actually trying to perform your best at Worlds and win Worlds like Dishsoap, you have to, the guy did it. So surely, which just goes in a different direction of who I look up to the most. I feel like he's put in so much effort in that way, and it's just cool to see a guy succeed while doing that. But yeah, I'll say that's an aspect that I would like to have a better way of framing how I view it, because I view it as not enjoyable, yet it's clearly very important.
Yeah. That reminds me of, I think I heard him say on stream, or maybe he was on a podcast where he said like he stares at stats like an hour a day or something. And maybe that was, I think it might have been the same conversation that he said that was why he preferred tactics.tools to meta TFT, just because it's like more pleasant to look at.
I remember him saying that as well.
And I feel like, I think it's challenging to find the right trade-off between, okay, you know that if you stared at stats more, like that would increase your slope. But at the same time, that would just, it would suck the energy out of it. And so how do you balance between doing the things that you know would give you better performance, but then at the same time, those are the things that might make Dishsoap really strong in one dimension of his game. Whereas, for example, like Setsuko would have completely different strengths because, for example, like he just loves playing fortune, like he's a fortune addict. And so because that's what gives him energy, like he loves playing that. And then in a tournament setting, that can create super high variance for him. But then also sometimes you just need variance to land your way, and that can actually create higher spikes in your results. Like I forget which tournament that was that he got like 1-1-1-1-1 on like almost every game. And so like, how do you think about that balance between figuring out like your style and your identity, your strength, what energizes you specifically intrinsically versus what are the things that you feel like you need to do at a baseline to at least be able to compete with someone like Dishsoap, but not necessarily overextend yourself and deplete your energy source to try to, it's like, for example, it's like you're contesting Syndra, but Dishsoap has an augment that like he has, I don't know, Baboom or whatever else. He already has blue buff. He already has an advantage on that dimension of the game, but you're just trying to contest him on Syndra. You're not going to win on that thing game.
Yeah, I like the way you're putting it in that analogy. I don't have a perfect answer for that for sure. I think it's something I myself have to improve on as well. But if I think about how I'd like to tackle such I think a lot of it just has to do with understanding like where your low hanging fruit is. I think insofar as we assume there's limitation or some constraint on whether it's the time you have to improve at something or if it's the motivation you have to improve at various skills. There's some skills you're much more willing to put in the time, others you're not. If you have that constraint, I think it comes down to selection of what it is you're trying to improve on, right? And if you find that it takes you a lot of effort to improve at such a skill A, but skill A is, let's say, it only comes up in some small percentage of your games, then why not just try to improve on skill B, which makes up a much larger percentage of your, right? It's like a trade-off of what is the most fruitful thing to improve on. Mm-hmm. And the most unfortunate scenario would be if you find that your low-hanging fruit is in fact the thing that you don't enjoy the most. And it's very possible. And I think if that is the case, there's the other factor, which is timing of when you try to work on such a thing, right? I think we also will all go through points where we feel most energized and most demotivated to try to work on some activity, some skill, right? Maybe you're the type of person that after a tournament where you perform well, you feel extra motivated to analyze your mistakes. For example, Dishsoap won Worlds. The very next day, he was analyzing a vault, right? And maybe you're the opposite. Maybe after you have a bad tournament, that's when you're most motivated to analyze your errors. And understanding that and trying to basically abuse your timing and willingness to look through your errors and just making sure you're also kind to yourself in that way. Don't go for it at times where you're not going to be motivated for it. Like one good way to go.
Yeah. And it's almost certainly that it would almost certainly happen if you were constantly trying to analyze your lowest hanging fruit, that you will be left with the lowest hanging fruit that you don't want to do because you would have done everything else that you wanted.
Yes. Yeah. It's likely not uncommon. Exactly.
That also reminds me of, I was watching a Roger Federer documentary on his final days leading up to his retirement. And they were showing him in the gym for the like final time in a competitive setting. And he was talking about how he was going to miss it. But when he first started going to the gym, he was like, it was a grind. I hated going to the gym every day. So like part of, I think he was alluding to is there are things that are low hanging fruit that you can also learn to like if you can create a habit. But the tough part is just getting started and making that habit, making a commitment to it.
Definitely. I like that as well. I think it's very much like true that you can start off not liking something, but especially if you find that it brings you good results, isn't it very possible that you'll start to like it? It's kind of makes sense, right? If you just state it like that, if it gets you way better, of course you start to like it. And yeah, just understanding as well, don't take yourself too seriously in terms of, yeah, you may not think you like some activity. That can always change, right?
Let's connect this idea of Dishsoap since we're on the topic of Dishsoap. Sounds like Dishsoap's your favorite player, right?
Yeah, I think it's easier to say now, and maybe it sounds like less less interesting because the guy just won world. I feel like he's always been, and maybe for other players, this may be the case as well, but I've always viewed him as a more relatable player in terms of trying to like understand how I might try to improve with the game, get to a high level. I don't know if, at least I'm not aware that he's been like at a pro or elite level at any esport prior to, I could be wrong with that, but I don't think he's achieved any similar level of success at other esports. Whereas, for example, someone like Setsuko, who was really good at League of Legends, and if you watch him play, I don't want to discredit, it's very possible that he is also just as methodical, deliberate with his approach and just as effortful with trying to get better at the game. On a very surface level, it seems more like a lot of it is he is able to borrow from his abilities from other prior games. And if you look at his APM, for example, fast, he seems to downplay how much sort of time he spends into improving at the game. Whereas Dishsoap is the exact opposite, right? He's very forward about how much time, effort, even doing like the most boring things like staring at stats. And for me, that is like the most, it gives people like me the most hope, right? I would imagine it gives viewers the most hope as well. If your goal is to actually be as good as this guy, he's basically saying all you need is time and effort. Obviously, that's not always true because the guy is clearly like a genius in some way. If you're him and you're beating out all these other, who I'm trying to regard as esports geniuses, and he's beating them, clearly he has some level of genius as well. But at least the approach that he seems to be championing is one of time, effort, and analysis. That's always been my sort of modus operandi. And so, yeah, this guy's always going to be the guy that I cheer for and want to emulate.
Yeah. It reminds me of, since I'm also a basketball guy, the difference between, let's say, a Jordan or a Kobe versus Steph Curry. I feel like Steph Curry has been so popular in large part because he's not 6'8" or 6'10" or something dunking, which the common person can't do. But anybody can go into the park and just chuck threes like hours on end until they like have a decent make rate.
Right.
So,
My favorite NBA player of all time is someone who's even less athletic. It's Steve Nash, 2-time MVP. Some of them maybe not deserved, but definitely even more relatable in the sense that he's even shorter and less athletic than Steph Curry.
yeah.
But I remember reading something about Kobe Bryant sort of complaining and him saying, which goes to my point of arguing that Dishsoap has some level of genius. He was saying like he finds it really frustrating, or really he was annoyed by people saying Steve Nash was not athletic. He's saying that Steve Nash is very clearly, if you see like his court vision, his dexterity, he's not normal. Yet people like to describe him as like this 6-foot white guy. He's listed as 6'3", but probably shorter than that, right? The NBA heights are all fake. 6-foot, like 180-pound white guy that has no athletic ability. This guy is like a superhuman. Yeah, but by his own standards.
So you mentioned Dishsoap really stands out to you from a work ethic standpoint. What would you identify as his like biggest strength and what makes him unique as a player? Is that specific point it? Because lots of people can work hard and not produce the results that he has produced. Uh, how would you describe what makes him so great at TFT?
I would love to have like the perfect answer to that, because if I did, I feel like it would help guide me even better. I think I would love to chat with him about it as well. I got a coaching session from him back in set 7. And I also got coaching sessions from many players I consider really good, or Ramblin as well back in the day. And I got to ask him directly what I thought separated him from top players.
Mhm.
And I can go over that in a sec. With Dishsoap, if I were to guess what I feel like his biggest edge is, besides just the work ethic, obviously that's probably one of the biggest ones. Besides that, I feel like, okay, not that I don't think other players think that their gameplay is flawed and try to improve on that, but Dishsoap goes through moments where he really thinks lowly of how he's playing a given patch or a game or some state of the game. Like he'll mention it in his Discord, he'll go off stream, and he just admits like very like straightforwardly to himself and to everyone else, I am, in his opinion and in his whatever his quality, bar is, I am shit at this patch and I need to improve. And he'll go through, whether it's looking through VODs of other players or stats or what have you. He's just very honest in that way with himself. And I feel like not every player is as good or as willing to admit that about their play. And I think having that, it's pretty unique, right? If you're the best in the world, and yet, at least in this set, he was the best in the world, at least by tournament metrics, and you're readily admitting very often, oh, I'm shit and I can get better in this way. Hopefully in a healthy way, not I'm shit and I start getting down on yourself. To me, that's fairly unique. Yeah, I don't think every top player has that mentality as often as he does.
Yeah, that reminds me, going back to the Marcel Proust quote around like having that right balance between the happiness that he clearly experienced with the payoff of winning, but also
Mhm.
that grief, like going through those downtimes and really honestly looking at what's wrong and figuring out how to learn.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. With Dishsoap still, analyzing further from a more TFT like specific analysis, it always seems like the guy is playing from ahead. I don't know if you have that feeling if you watch much Dishsoap. But another thing, I feel like he plays much more tempo than other players. And like comparing him to like people like Setsuko or other Chinese players who like lean into loss streak or fortune a lot more. Um, he seems to have a different understanding of how to play out early and mid game. He also rolls a lot deeper, and so it has actually made me try to analyze, especially looking at his finals VODs, early game decisions a lot more. I think I even asked him on. He was mentioning one loss on stage 3 of his. He was at like 91 HP, if not mistaken, like a 6 streak, and he lost 3-2. Or I think he'd already lost his streak. He was like 91 HP, lost his streak on 3-1. And then he has a bunch of pairs on 3-2, doesn't roll, and he loses. And he loses like maybe 5 or 6 HP. Again, no streak, right? And he mentions on stream, I think this loss is much more meaningful than it looks. And I feel like no one in chat thought that. I definitely didn't think that. I was like, wait, why? You were already in a 1 loss streak. You have 91 HP. Why would that loss even? It was a small loss. Why would that matter? And so I asked him, hey, like he said he's gonna answer every question. Yeah, well, you said that it's more meaningful than it looked. Why? And he goes, oh, lives, man. It's just lives. At this level and in this tournament, every life matters. And it was so easy for me to press D once, and with high likelihood, I would save that life. You save that life, yeah, not on streak, it's not gold, but life is a life.
That could be
Like
one play.
the guy is playing around lives in a different way, um, more so than what I would think. And then I tried also spreadsheeting out how much gold. The other thing I noticed he does differently as well is he levels very often in stage 2. Like on 2, he plays to 5 loss streak a lot less frequently than other players. And somehow he still ends up with gold to roll level 8. I feel like when I think of a gameplay that you're always leveling 2-1, it leads you into a spot where you're just dirt poor on 4-2 and you can't hit anything. And yet the guy like does both. He levels in 2-1 all the time, and then even without a 5 streak, he still always has enough gold to roll up on 4-2. And so I was just the other day spreadsheeting out how much gold you make given different streak scenarios, 4 wins, whether it's win-win loss, whether it's win, loss, win, and leveling and very common sort of econ intervals you'll make. I think the most common if you level, for example, is 0, 0, 10, 0, 0, 10, 20, 20, 30 on stage 2. If you don't level, you can often hit something like 10, 10, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. This is a 2-1, 2-2, 2-3, 2-5, 2-6, 2-7. And I think my analysis was that I, at least as a player, am overvaluing 5 loss streaks and undervaluing 4-win combos. And it looks like Dishsoap plays around 4-win combos a lot. He ends up in spots where he doesn't 5 streak, but he'll end up with like win-win, loss-win, or win-loss, or loss-win-win. So some combo of those. And a 4-win stage 2 is actually really good. You're barely behind in terms of gold to maybe 5. Maybe not barely. You're about 5 gold behind someone who 5 lost, but you get the advantage of level odds. You get to the advantage of being higher HP. You get to hold more units than you do if you're trying to like make all these econ intervals. And it seems to manifest in his like high rolling of 4-cost units, 3-cost units, 3-cost 3-star, 2-cost 3-cost 2 stars earlier than other players because he's always ahead in level. He's always level 5 on 2-3, always level 4 on 2-1, and so he has these level odds advantages and everything. And so yeah, that's another thing that I feel like less sort of meta analysis of like improvement and more specific to TFT. I feel like that is advantage that he seems to have over most players.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And that HP lead can also be converted into econ in stage 4 when you can hold. You don't have to like worry about dying right away.
Yeah, exactly. It definitely shows because his average level is always higher than other players as well, right? So he's not pressured into growing so deep and then greed 9 from a higher HP spot.
Mm-hmm.
He can also play more so towards, not that he elect to do so as often, but when you are healthy, you can also pull a Setsuko, right? And pull a classic stage 4 fortune, right? Which Setsuko also actually tends to play around HP a lot as well. He just will then convert it into an advantage in another way later on.
And it's very poetic that Dishsoap's winning game was Birthday Present, which is exactly the style of complete tempo and like stacking gold for streak.
Yeah, exactly. Will left to, a win, right? Whereas typically you would assume it wouldn't.
Right. All right. So we talked about Dishsoap's unique kind of strength. How would you describe your own personal strengths and what differentiate you from other top players?
Maybe not as different as what I was mentioning about Dishsoap, but I would say maybe you can argue it's both a strength and potentially even a weakness. But I tend to view my own play as very fluid in that I try to pick up the best of what I can from several other players. I think my approach to many other fields as well has always been to stand on the shoulders of giants and to try to be as least biased towards your own sort of what you view as your own strengths as much as possible. It can very easily get you lost in not really understanding your own play style as well. But I think at its best, you can imagine that you pick up the best from every player you watch, right? You watch Dishsoap stage 2, and then you recognize that, he doesn't play reroll, but honestly, this spot in stage 3 is actually a reroll spot. And so now I recall watching Robin pilot this reroll spot in stage 3 really well. Oh, but now I'm on stage 4, and I have an HP advantage, and where Dishsoap would push 9, actually Setsuko would actually play Fortune here. And you just try to pick up the advantages that every single player has. And that's like the potentially good aspect of that. And I try to stray as far away as from assuming that Marcel plays a certain way, and so I should play reroll. I should play forecast. I try to just emulate what I think best players would do and convert that into EV, and just based on the spot in the most sort of logical way possible, regardless of my opinions and my sort of biases, play towards highest EV, whatever that might be. And at its worst, you get lost. You don't know, you don't have your own style. You're just mimicking players left and right. And so it's definitely a pro and a con, but it's nice to think that it's possible to achieve peak performance by doing it. At least in theory, it sounds nice. But I've always been that way with other activities as well, where I try not to assume that I have a style. It's much more so that I just play to EV, and you accumulate different ways of assessing your EV, whether it's watching, reading YouTube videos, analyses, and you just apply all of these and you just try to make the best decision given the spot. And you just don't assume that you are this kind of player.
So connecting that idea around how you feel like your biggest strength is acting like a sponge, and if you're an AI algo and you should want as large of a data set as possible, and then you're coming up with your own unique conclusions as far as, okay, this unique spot I learned from this person, and that unique spot I learned from that person, and then how you can produce the optimal decision at any point. Let's connect that idea with community around what you were talking about earlier around, hey, you're surprised by the reception on Twitch, on Reddit, even just you reaching out to me and us having this conversation. It seems like one of your, I would even argue might be one of your strengths is like, it seems like you're quite a social person and like you enjoy interacting with people. You enjoy getting new ideas from different people. And I also recall hearing Dishsoap say that it might have been in the podcast with Rodan that he almost finds it awkward to now play off stream because he's just talking to himself.
I
Because
remember
he's
hearing
so
that as
used,
well.
yeah, he's so
It's
used
pretty
now
funny.
to just like vocalizing thoughts. And we've talked about this on Discord around like finding that right balance around what do you say on stream? How do you balance between interacting with the community and basically how do you balance between collecting more data from the outside and making sure that you're collecting more signal than noise, and at the same time providing enough space, time, compute power for you to make your own decision in the moment to produce the best output possible. And you can apply this to an individual game. You can apply this to how you're allocating your time between play versus research versus producing a Reddit post, like reaching out to people and talking to people, like us having this conversation right now. how do you think about the role of community, interaction with other people, and performance? Like, how do you balance all of that?
It's a tough task, man. Really good question. I think again, there's no perfect answer to that. I don't think I have the perfect solution to it, but I think ultimately it comes down to I think it's similar to what I was mentioning earlier about like when you want to time certain peaks, in my opinion, like you can always change your priorities, right? Given in a given week, in a given in a month. And so, for example, the top players do this, right? Dishsoap is a streamer and he actually does like interact with community in some ways, right? He also is researching himself and is a player. And if you just monitor his stream, he was not online for a good month prior to about a month, I think, or maybe at least a few weeks prior to Worlds. And so I think it's just a matter of recognizing what your goals are and when, I think the more your goals are around trying to get more exposure, right? If you're trying to learn from others or you're trying to make friends in the community, then definitely be more social, more outward can be a priority at those times. And if your goal again is more so towards trying to improve, whether even it's around a tournament, but if you're just like in an improvement mindset, there's some, I don't know, I think there'll be some weeks where you just find, oh, I just really want to feel like I'm getting better. And you catch yourself in those moments and you just find a way to be more of a hermit. And whether it's watching VODs or what have you, trying to get better. One thing I'd like to get better at this set, which I have plans for already, is to be more active in a study group. And so then I'll be in a study group with Pocky, the Demasian Raptor, Saint Vicious. It's Kai's study group. Kai is a content creator. Raptor was the one that invited me to this one. So I was really thankful. I actually, it's funny as you mentioned it, that you view a strength of mine as being fairly social. I actually have always been, I grew up being very much an introvert and have always still considered myself as such. I've tried to improve my ability to communicate and express myself actually using very similar approaches as we've discussed to try to improve at things as well. I've always considered myself growing up as a very bad communicator. I was very much not able to trust myself and too shy, and I've worked on improving that over time. But I still am at in my heart of hearts, very much an introvert. And I'm happier focusing on like my own things and not being as social than otherwise. So I am more easily able to just sit down and focus more so than be very social about trying to improve at the game. Nonetheless, you have to recognize TFT is a game where most of the top players are getting their information in these kinds of groups, right? I think Dishsoap is one like exception in some way. He does do VOD reviews with other players. He mentions oftentimes, I did his VOD review with Socks, with Preston, with whoever. But I think ultimately his main like focus time is solo. And yeah, I think players differ in that way. But yeah, I think it's just a matter of finding your own approach and seeing what works best.
So how do you think about that balance for yourself moving forward? Like in terms of how much time you're investing into Twitch, into, I don't know if you mentioned whether you're going to make some YouTube videos. How do you think about balancing the time investment moving forward for yourself?
What for my own goals, first and foremost, my goal is to be competitive. And so it's been really nice to see the reception to me starting out streaming. But I think the good thing about the spot I'm in my opinion, is that the people that seem to be giving me the feedback, like the way I explain or like how much more verbal I am about my thought process. And I think it only makes sense that they would appreciate my thought process when I'm playing well. I feel like you want to get the analysis of a good player. Sure, someone can be as verbal as they want, but they're not good, then who cares, man? But which means that it's very easy for me to be motivated to be good, right? If people want to hear me when I'm at my best, then it's motivating for me to be at my best. And so I think I will likely just maintain the goal of wanting to be as good as I possibly can first and foremost, and stream more so as a secondary thing. Even though by hours, I don't know if it'll end up looking that way, because I have found that I don't get that tired streaming, and I already don't get that tired playing. I can play ridiculous hours, and so maybe I'll be able to just do both. Would be like the nice idea, but we'll see. First and foremost, my goal is to try and just be at my best performance wise and go from there.
Okay. So now I wanted to connect this back to the decision that you just made. And we talked about this briefly before we started this episode, but your decision to commit full time to TFT and I believe, quit your job.
I'm actually just about to tell my managers about
Oh,
this.
so-
I told them over message already, but I'm gonna tell them over a call in like a couple hours. I'm actually nervous
Okay.
about it.
We'll,
Mentioning to
we'll,
them.
we'll
Like,
make
no,
sure.
we can definitely, it's fine. We can mention it now. Like, no worries. It's not like
Okay.
you're gonna put this up before they get the chat with them. Maybe.
So talk me through the decision-making process, like what thoughts are going through your mind, how you're feeling about that. I imagine it's been a whirlwind of like kind of a ride in the last week for you to make this decision or however long, and where you would like to be, let's say 3 months from now, 6 months from now, year from now, like having made this decision. And you alluded to the fact that Kim and Parker was like, this is a horrible decision. What are you personally hoping to get out of really committing to TFT full time?
I'm actually viewing it less as a like what maybe I'm pulling a Marcel Proust on this, and viewing it less as what is the end destination, and more so just for me, it just feels like this is so clearly the path that I enjoy the most right now. Maybe that's a very short-sighted way of viewing it, but I feel like I've already spent so much of my life not pursuing endeavors in that way. I've always tried to take the most logical approach in terms of what financially, career-wise, what makes the most sense. I very easily could have jumped ship from my traditional tech career in 2017. My YouTube channel was exploding. I got in a contract with an esports org and I was better at Clash than I currently am at TFT, I'll say. And so there was a clear path to try to monetize, have a viable financial career, not financial career, just like making money out of Clash. Yeah. While pursuing that path, which I knew I enjoyed. And I didn't because it made much more sense to just work towards a promotion at work. You make way more money that way and then move from there. And that's what I did. But to me now it feels okay if I've already done that for n amount of years, and if sitting down with my wife and trying to understand our goals, whether it's over a long period of time in the next 10 years financially, if these things all are covered, then why not take the short-sighted approach right now, right? This is what I enjoy doing. I feel like one approach I like to think of when making decisions like this is it's called regret minimization. I think it's a Jeff Bezos thing, or I think he mentions this as one of the principles he uses. I wouldn't say I'm the biggest Jeff Bezos fan by any means, but thanks for all the Prime subs, by the way, for taking Bezos' money, people who have given Prime sub. But it's something that I feel like I would look back on if I were to stop right now and be like, what if? And in fact, I already carry some what ifs, which is fine. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I always wondered, what if I didn't stop with my golf career? What if I didn't stop with Clash? And I feel like now is the time for me to put my foot down and be like, no more what ifs. I'm just going to go all in on TFT. I don't even think I'm in a spot where a lot of players make the same decision. I'm not like vying for number one in the NA by any stretch, but I feel like in my heart of hearts, I feel like I can give a good run for being competitive, whether it's on regionals, whether it's make worlds. I don't think of myself as being that far from that level, even though it may look to a lot of people that I am. And whether that's arrogance or confidence, or whatever you want to call it, it's just something that I don't think I would be very happy sort of leaving on the table. And so that's why I'm pursuing it. And the other thing too is just realizing that at least the state that my career, my professional career, which is a software engineer, will be left at if I take a break right now, it's very likely that I can go back, whether it's to my existing job or to another tech job in the future or some startup or something like that. I'm still viewing this as not a permanent departure from that career. And so it's a mixture of all these things that allow me to be like, okay, you know what, let me YOLO a little bit, whether it's going to be for a set or a couple sets a year or what have you, and see where that takes me.
So I mentioned earlier, I'm an executive coach for startup founders. So I'm going to ask you a question I asked some of them is what you're embarking on is similar to doing a startup in a way, like not exact. You're leaving a secure job, which a lot of founders do, to embark on this thing that you're really passionate about with a lot of uncertainty and unclearness about where it's going to lead. So I'm curious, one, what is your runway? And two, what does a minimum level of success look like where you're like, let's say a year or two from now being like, yeah, even though obviously obviously you would like to hit the escape velocity where you become a unicorn at TFT and you like rank one, you become a GOAT and everyone's, oh, Marcel, like you're fucking the best TFT player ever lived, which I wouldn't say is That's not a 0% probability. But at the same time, that's not like a 90% probability.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Definitely.
And so the question also, what is a minimum threshold where you're like a year or two from now, if things don't go perfectly, like what's the baseline level of, hey, like that was worth the ride? Like I tried my best and that I feel satisfied with what I did there. What does that minimum look like? And then what is like the kind of what you were alluding to earlier around step 11? Like what's like kind of a mean target? So what's
I
like
think
kind of
it's
the
like,
trend and what's a mean?
yeah, as far as performance in TFT, I think goal wise, it had been, and I think will still be this coming up set, trying to make regionals. I think if I'm able to hit that goal, which I feel like it, in a way, I don't know if I want to call it a stretch goal or a more realistic goal. I feel like it used to be more of, in my mind, a realistic goal, but then they made regionals so hard to qualify for that now it almost feels like a stretch goal. But I feel like that is, I don't know what I want to call my mean expectation as far as performance goes. I have better understanding of my mean performance as far as content creation and sort of profitability, viability. As far as that goes, I can probably project what my mean would look like based on the growth I'm seeing currently. And I think I'll have even a much better understanding when I start to stream as the set starts, because it'll be twofold, like two things changing. One is the top streamers taking more eyeballs away from my stream, but second, more popularity in the game as a whole, because it's start of a new set, right? And so I'll have a better understanding of where I'll actually lie. Am I actually able to consistently get 1,000 viewers, or am I going to sit more toward 200? And you can project from there, try to understand, oh, what mean do I have? Assuming I don't end up exploding and hitting rank 1, which will obviously help the streaming. But as far as, yeah, performance goes, I would say making regionals is like some baseline that I'd really like to hit. If I were to guess, I'd like to believe in myself where I would say mean level for a set, one set out is about that level. I would say that's probably 50th percentile outcome is making regionals. Probably making worlds is more in the, on one set away is probably more in the order of 90 to 95 percentile outcome. That's probably what I would guess. I feel like I've improved a lot over the last set. So like my slope has been pretty good, but I'm sure you're familiar, and everyone that's tried to get better at TFT is familiar with, it's so inconsistent. I feel like I might feel like I'm on a good path right now, and it's so easy to still not get there, even after I feel like I've worked on, I spent all this time, do it full time, and it's so possible that I still end up not getting there. And so I think the more important thing will be to make sure that I'm enjoying the process. I feel like I went into this because I love competing. I enjoy trying to feel like I'm improving. And so as long as I keep those things in front of me, I feel like I do have the confidence that it'll get me to where I want to be. But if those things stop, if I stop liking competing, if I somehow feel like I'm spinning my wheels, or if, let's say, the set or the game goes in a different direction, I should also just be able to pull the plug. I feel like as difficult as that might be, if ever that time comes, that should just also be something as an option, right?
All right. That sounds like a good place to wrap things up. We covered a lot of ground. I've had a lot of fun with this conversation.
Oh, it was a super fun interview, man. Thanks for all the super thoughtful questions. You even did the work to pull up these Marcel Proust. Is that how's it pronounced? Proust? Proust quotes. Yeah, that's so fun. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah. No, I had a blast too. Where can people connect with you? Whether that's Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, like if people want to follow up with you after listening to this.
Yeah, my plugs will be on Twitch. You can find me at Marcel P _ TFT. I've been pretty consistent and plan to be very consistent this coming set with streaming. Maybe I'll try and pull a Dishsoap and like stream less before competitive events just to focus more. But overall, I'll plan to be very consistent on that. And then I'm on Twitter at Marcel P Clash. I'm not as active anymore, but you can find me there. And then on Reddit at Marcel _P. I plan to still like post stuff here and there. I feel like as Eric mentioned, made a big post on improving. You can find that post. And then as I have been streaming a lot more, I feel like I get asked like any streamer, a bunch of questions, and there are so many that are commonly asked. And so I feel like it's very easy to cover a lot of these things in another post, which will hopefully be beneficial to all these players that are asking these questions. Common pitfalls like transferring items to a 2-star versus not, playing traits versus you. There's so many. What are other things? Splitting items is probably one of the most common things, but where people suggest putting BIS on some unit, but it's like a one-off item or 2-off items. But yeah, something like this, I'll definitely make posts on. So definitely catch me on Reddit as well if you're interested in that.
Awesome. And I'll provide the links in the description to this video. But all right. Thanks, Marcel. I really appreciate you. Appreciate the time. And hopefully we'll do this again soon. And I'll be rooting for you to be able to hit your goal of making regional.
Appreciate that, man. Thanks so much again.